on one of those players you mentioned, Callum Hudson-Odoi, because I wanted to focus on Callum Hudson-Odoi, and I know you've been very vocal about him and the criticism slash, as it leads into on social media, a lot of time abuse recently. Really frustrating. I want to pick up on this straight away because unfortunately, I don't like to reference this publication on my channel. I
Yeah.
usually have a ban on referencing them, but unfortunately, in the case of this discussion, it is very relevant. The Sun posted an article on, I believe it was Monday morning, because on Sunday, Callum Hudson-Odoi took part in an amateur game which was about promoting the fight against knife crime in London, and it was I didn't see it through the Sun. I saw it through, I think, either his Twitter account or so, and I thought, oh, that was a nice thing for Callum Hudson-Odoi to do, and then it blew up on Monday with a lot of Chelsea fans vocally
Yeah.
criticising the Sun. And I think for me, this leads into a wider thing about Callum Hudson-Odoi that I've seen in the criticism of him, because I think he has had a bit of an underwhelming season, but I think you have to throw in the context that he got injured twice during the season,
Yeah.
and he's still a very young player. My biggest problem with criticism of him is it always seems to relate to his salary. That's my
Yeah.
biggest frustration.
Yeah.
I guess, you could go on a tangent because I know you've always very vocal on social media about this, sort of your opinions around sort of everything of the criticism of Callum Hudson-Odoi.
Yeah, I think first of all, I agree, and I'm sure Callum agrees himself too that he's had an underwhelming season. I'm sure he planned the season to go completely differently to how it was. We saw glimpses of quality, but context was injuries. Picking up a serious ACL was going to affect him throughout the season regardless. So, you know, this was definitely a season of growth for Callum. Of course, outside as well, he had an unfortunate indiscretion too, which obviously he was proven innocent of, which we all knew he was. But he has to realize that he can't take anything for granted. Now that there's players coming here now, hopefully now that the season's out the way, he can really just settle down and focus now on his football, which is a good thing to see. But just seeing that Sun article as well, that's what I was referring to about the sensationalism, because it's about finding a reactionary headline. And unfortunately, and I'm sure you see it yourself creating content, whenever you make a video, people always refer to your video back to the title of your video or the headline. And it's quite hard to distinguish the difference between, the information you're reading and obviously the headline just being like an advertisement to even attract you to watch it in the first place or read it in the first place or listen to it in the first place. So in that sense, the Sun, very egregious, of course, doing something that was very positive for a charity event. You have to really spend time thinking about how to make things sound different, because what your plan is to appease to the people that maybe, don't like him, be reactionary, and obviously try to hope that the negativity implied in the article is going to attract enough people to read it, which is, it's frustrating because it's never consistent. Because if that was a different player, for example, it would have been if that was a Phil Foden, you get a completely different headline to Hudson-Odoi, which, I think is one of those realities that people don't like to really speak about or discuss, because I guess, I don't know, maybe it's just too like emotionally triggering, I guess. But it is frustrating. And it comes down to these publications, because, for example, to this day, even though it's been disproven time and time again, people will constantly refer back to his money. Every single time refer back to his money, regardless of the fact that Hudson-Odoi isn't even the best young player at the club. In Pulisic signed his contract's like 145, 150. And, when you look at other young players for big clubs across Europe, it's not like Callum is like the top 3% or top 1% or whatever. So it is annoying, and it's frustrating that narratives like this just never die. Like, at what point does someone have to just accept that, okay, I'm just wrong? But I think this is why these sensational headlines are a thing in the first place, because, we live in times today where, people think that you can just have like a nuanced discussion with someone and you can like change opinions. It's not about that. I think tribalism is at its peak in today's times. I just think that someone that's told themselves they don't like Callum will probably always have that opinion until he does something like wins a World Cup or wins a Premier League. That's how long lasting it tends to be, because we see these these narratives used against players even after they retire. So these papers, these publications, they know what they're doing. They know what they're trying to fuel. And it was good that he was called out, that journalist, because he went on private straight away. But again, if it's about the question of, how do you how do you just like negate like incorrect information? I don't know how to do it, to be honest, because I think that comes down to the person as an individual. You know, do you have enough perspective and balance that you can maybe tell yourself, you know what, it's okay if something's wrong. It's not saying anything against my personality. I can move on because I believe that we should be equal with each other and we should be fair. I mean, that's what I thought it was, but clearly isn't.
I think all of that is spot on, and unfortunately, the thing is for me, something that does frustrate me is right. It was good that there was a lot of reaction against that misinformation from the Sun, but my issue is I see fans when they share transfer articles. It's usually 99.9% of the time it's transfer articles positively about someone we're going to sign being shared from the same publication. And it's like, that's what annoys me, because it's like, if you're going to label a publication, you know, mostly misinformation, you know, a really bad publication, but then you're sharing that publication when it tells you something you want to hear, then I think that's a problem as well. And also, you know, I think people have a real problem admitting they're wrong. I think that's something that, unfortunately, for a number of things, tribalism, whether it's, you know, ego on social media, you know, admitting you're wrong on something, a player, or just generally, I think it's so hard to see now. So I think that's the difficulty you're sort of fighting against. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people, perception of reality is a massive problem for me in football. And just generally, but I think in football, it's a massive problem with players and with clubs that, like, you'll see Jorginho, I think, had this a lot. I think there's a number of players, Callum Hudson-Odoi, I think you can falls into the same category. And unfortunately, I think, as I've said with other things, like I remember referring to this when I was talking about the Kepa death threats a few weeks back. It's like, unfortunately, all you can do is be a good individual yourself. I think, like, unfortunately, there are always going to be those publications. There always going to be those people who want to abuse footballers. I mean, that's unfortunately, until something massive happens, I think it's just about being responsible yourself.
Yeah, I think that's really what it comes down to. But, you know, football is, you know, it's an emotional game. You have an emotional reaction to everything that comes out. But I guess it comes down to the individual knowing how to control their emotions, I guess. I think, you know, what you were mentioning about consistency. For example, Gareth Bale, he's not playing for Real Madrid. He's only like $500,000 a week. He's golfing. And if you were to base that example on so many examples you read about, you know, our players and players in general, you know, you're a football player, you know, if a manager says jump this high, you bloody do that because you're on a big contract. I haven't seen any negative things said about Gareth Bale, you know. I think that's what it comes down to all the time. It's always this constant picking and choosing. It's not about consistency. I don't think it's even about those things. I just think, I don't know, you know, even based it back on Callum, people will always constantly bring up the fact that he held the ball to ransom, and I've never understood that. I mean, an 18-year-old holding Marina to ransom. I mean, does that even repeating that, does that make any sense? What would he say? Is Callum that suave with his words, and he's just so, you know, on point with his business knowledge that he could even do that himself? Of course not. So, yeah, I just think that the fact that he could have gone to a better club maybe doesn't sit right with some people. I mean, I'm not too sure. Again, I think it comes down to the individual on why they'd have to ask themselves why they get so angry and worked up about that.